I've had this router table for a couple of years, but today it's just not that practical. It lacks storage and mobility, and to use it, I have to clear off a good portion of my bench. So today I'm going to build a new router table that will knock your socks off. At least, it did mine, on Timber Biscuit. So the first thing I needed to do was get my router table frame assembled. And luckily, this one comes together pretty easily. It has a steel frame that's going to support all the storage and drawers that I want, plus it sits on casters, which means it's mobile. Now when it came to choosing a router table to start with, I felt like Woodpeckers was a great choice. I use their tools all the time and I have nothing but good things to say about them. Plus I already had the router fence, so it felt like a no-brainer. So as I said, the assembly of this thing comes together pretty quickly. All the variances are super tight and the thing fits together like a dream. Now because it's Woodpeckers, people will undoubtedly say this was a very expensive router table. But honestly in comparison to the competitors, it's right there. And these days I'm in the boat of buy once, cry once, so I think it was a pretty good deal. So now that I've dropped in the router and I have most of my pieces assembled, let's get started on the storage. So the first thing I needed to do was get the measurements for my interior frame. And I'm going to build my cabinets out of some birch plywood that I have in the shop. But being that this is shop furniture, it doesn't have to be that high quality of plywood, anything would do the job. So here I'm using 2 offcuts of my 3/4 inch plywood to offset the center shelf. This will ensure a nice tight fit for my shelf in between my 2 sides. Now I could call this 1.5 inches and just do it that way, but plywood's never 3/4 of an inch, so it's better to take the measurement from the source. So once I had my center shelf cut to the correct size, I went ahead and cut out my 2 upper side panels. From there I could use my first shelf width to cut out 2 more. For my storage needs, I'm going to build 3 drawers, with the upper drawer leaving me a top shelf. This is because there's things around the router table that I like to grab quickly, and I don't want to have to go in the drawer to get to them. Plus I've decided to go with the downdraft dust cabinet for dust collection, which I'm going to need access to, so that solves that problem. So with my upper shelf parts all cut out, I could go ahead and start on the bottom ones. And I'll cut these out the same way using my crosscut sled. Here I just try to optimize the amount of material I used, so I had very little waste. Then we can slap them in place, kind of like Will did Chris. Too soon? Alright, so my 2 upper side pieces go in pretty easily. I'll say now that I had to remove the downdraft box in the next step, so it'd be a lot easier to put this together if it wasn't there. And as you can see here, my center shelf makes a nice tight wedge between my 2 sides, which is exactly what we're going for. From there I could repeat the steps for the bottom. Here I just replaced my MC Hammer impression for my Jackie Chan. Next I popped a few screws in the frame holes to secure the bottom sides. From the top I did the same thing, only this time I had to pre-drill a couple pilot holes for my screws. This in combination with the rest of our cabinet parts will give us plenty of support. Next it was time to drill in some pocket holes for our upper center shelf. Now, I'm using pocket holes here because it's super easy and really that's all it needs. And hey, if you guys want plans for this one, let me know down in the comments, and if there's enough interest, I'll pin a link and post it to the community as well. Alright, so with 4 sets of pocket holes on either side, I went ahead and cut a few spacer strips for the interior of the box. These will offset the drawer slides away from the edge of the frame, as well as give me an even box across the drawer. So from there it was time to install the top shelf. And with the entire router table flipped upside down and the downdraft box removed, it was easy to get the shelf in there. But prior to driving in those screws, I made sure to put the box back inside. This is because the upper lip of the frame hangs over a little too much for the downdraft table to fit after the drawer is installed. So once I had the spacers in place, I went ahead and drove in the screws. Now I did have to get a little funky with my drill configuration here, because the space between the drawers is a little tight. So if you don't have one of these 90-degree connections for your drill, you'd probably be fine using 2 pocket hole screws on either side. And the final step was to attach our spacers with a couple screws. With the upper carcass complete, I could turn my attention to the lower vertical partition. And here I just needed to cut 2 notches on either end to give me some space around the frame. This allows for a solid connection for our vertical partition. Without the notches, it'd either be too tight or there'd be a large gap. So once I had my notches cut, I drilled in 3 pocket holes on the top and bottom. And thankfully this will conclude the use of the pocket hole jig. Just kidding, pocket holes are awesome. Sometimes. Alright, so to center up that vertical partition, I just cut out 2 spacers over at the table saw and used them to center the board. While I could have measured this out to center it, I find it faster and easier to use something like a spacer, because then I don't have to think about it. And if you like tips about working smarter and not harder in the shop, make sure you like this video. This way it can spread to more people. Thank you for your help. Alright, so next I cut out a few nailer strips for my back panel. These will just be the strips I use to attach the rear panel when it comes time. And again, there, I'll use some pocket holes. And like I mentioned earlier, these supports add some added structure to our carcass. Alright, seriously, no more pocket holes. So next I need to cut a few strips for my lower drawer slide offsets. And I'll attach these the same way as I did the upper ones. In my haste to make it to my son's baseball game in time, I cut out 2 extras for the center, but they're not needed, so pretend that never happened. There we go. So now it's time to make the drawers. And to do that, I'll just measure out the frame. Now I did take measurements from the upper and lower parts of the frame here, just in case there was a little shift, which there actually was by about a 1/16 of an inch from the top to the bottom. So again, make sure you take your measurements from your source, not from what they should be. So when I make drawers, I try to cut out all the parts so that I have the least amount of cuts possible. There's nothing worse than having to go back and reset for a cut you just made. So I started with my drawer sides, which I know in this case are all going to be the same length. And then I moved to the drawer box fronts and the drawer box backs. Try saying that 5 times fast. Drawer box backs, drawer box. So earlier I mentioned trying to conserve material on this build, and honestly, I don't think I could have done any better than this. So with my sides, fronts, and backs all cut out, I could work on the bottoms. And for that, I'll just use some 1/4" ply. And if you're like me and you forget your drawer bottom dimension rules, just remember short round. 1/2 inch shorter, 1/2 inch wider. And before we forget anything else, don't forget to subscribe. I make new videos all the time showcasing woodworking tips, tricks, and furniture builds, so click the bell so you don't miss out. Thanks for your support. So with my flat bottom blade installed, I could cut out the grooves for the drawer bottoms. Now as I said before, I make my drawer bottoms a 1/2 inch oversized or undersized, so these grooves will be a 1/4 inch deep. And since my plywood's a 1/4 inch thick, I have to do 2 passes over the blade, so once I've nudged my fence over slightly, I make another pass. Now making all these grooves for the drawers and the router table really got me thinking. Like, what router bit do you think would hurt the most to stick your finger in? It's gotta be the straight bit, right? Let me know what you think in the comments. So with all my drawer parts cut out, I could get to assembly. And I find it easiest to assemble these guys just like this. I loosely put the box together and then remove one end and glue it in place. Then I attach it with a couple of brad nails to hold things while the glue dries, flip it over, and repeat the process. This is a really easy way to achieve square drawers every time. Not to mention, they're super quick to assemble. And being that these are shop drawers, quick, easy, and strong are exactly what we want. Alright, so next it was time to attach the drawer slides. Now I'm going to be using what claim to be soft close drawer slides, but we'll see how they work out. In any case, they're 18 inches and full extension, so that's always a plus. To attach them, I just extend the drawer slide out, push it flush to the front of the box using a stop, then make sure it's flush to my tabletop and screw it in place. From there I can just attach the adjoining slides to the bottom of the shelves. I just make sure to offset the slides by about 1/8 of an inch from the front of the case so that there's plenty of room for them to pull in. Like any set of drawer slides, they're kind of difficult to go in at first, but once they're in place, they actually work out pretty well. And as you can see here, the soft close functionality does seem to work. They're not Blum, but for $9 a pair, you can't beat the price. I'll have them linked down in the description if you want to check them out. Next, it was time to cut the drawer faces. And again, I'll measure from the top and bottom because there is a slight variance between the two. But for my drawer faces, I'm going to go with a grain match. So this one panel of plywood will give me all my drawers. Once I had my wider top drawer cut out, I took the shorter panel over to the bandsaw and cut it down the center. This will give me a smaller center gap between the lower drawers. I just used some painter's tape on the bottom to avoid any tear out. From there, it was back over to the table saw to cut them to their final height. Again, here I was just sure to cut from the bottom. Once I had all my drawer faces cut out, I applied a chamfer around the outside edge, making sure to avoid that center area where the two drawers meet. With my edges chamfered, it was time to attach the drawer fronts. And to do that, I'll just use some Starbond CA glue and some accelerator. I first applied a little CA glue to the front of the drawer box, some accelerator to the back of the drawer face, and then stuck on my drawer front. Because the drawer faces sit just inside the frame of the table, they're super easy to square up and don't really require any measuring. And because it's just CA glue, if it's not straight, I can just get it back. Unlike that 2 AM text. From there, I could drive in a couple screws to hold the drawer fronts in place permanently. For these smaller drawers, 2 screws should do the job, but for the longer, wider drawer, I'll use 3. This just ensures everything stays flush while I mount the pulls. And speaking of the pulls, let's attach those now. Once I've marked the center of my drawer top to bottom, I mark the center of the drawer from left to right, then offset that by 1.5 inches. That'll give me my location for my 2 screw holes. Now the pulls I'm using don't have any square edges, so they won't get caught on any pant legs in the shop, which is a good thing. Believe me. The last thing you want is to be moving around that $7,000 dresser, only to have your router table coming along with you. I guess it's a good thing this router table's on casters. Speaking of which, what's the heaviest tool in your shop that's on casters? I feel like casters are great for this type of tool, but how often do you move your larger machines? Alright, so last up was the back panels. And here I'll just use some 1/4 inch plywood and tack it in place. I will leave a gap near the dust collection though, so that I can access it in the future. Plus I still have to feed the wire for the router through, and if I ever want to get to it again, I want it to be easy. So once I have my measurements, I just ripped everything down over at the table saw. And hey, if you're enjoying this video and you want to support the channel, I'd like to invite you to join my Patreon, where you'll get discount codes on plans and merch, an invite to the Discord server, and some other free stuff. Not to mention behind the scenes access, plus I'm always looking for new ways to get you guys involved. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, check out the link below. And for those who've already joined, again, thank you so much for your support. It means the world. So with my back panels attached, I can start addressing all those accessories for the router table. And I'll start with using some Kaizen foam. If you've seen my video about the 5-shop upgrades for under $100, then you've seen me use Kaizen foam in the past. This stuff's great for organizing drawers and keeping small parts in one place. I also came across some dense foam for holding router bits, and all I needed to do was cut it down by about a ½ inch on either side so that it would fit in my lower drawer. Luckily the bandsaw works great for this type of thing. For my second cut I did sneak up on the fit just to make sure that it stayed nice and snug in the drawer. Now I chose to put this in a lower drawer because I have some really tall bits, so they should fit great. And again, I'll leave links to both of these down in the description if you guys want to check them out. So once I had things moved to the floor, I could start cutting out my Kaizen foam, and I'll quickly breeze through that. All I did was trace these out with my pen and then cut them out with an X-Acto knife. You can adjust the depth based on how thick your items are. And as you can see, I have plenty of space for additions in the future. Last up was to drop in my bits into the bit storage, which I gotta say has plenty of space for the bits that I have and plenty of room for the bits that I don't. From there I could drop in the router and plate and then screw them in place. And last but not least, I could reattach the fence and this router table is ready to go. So in the end, consider those socks a necessary casualty, because this router table setup solves a lot of problems. Now I don't have to fuss with moving things on and off the bench, I have a mobile solution, and everything can stay in one place, which I gotta say is really nice. Not to mention that the dust collection will be significantly better with this solution, plus the added storage gives me plenty of space to expand in the future. So if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, be sure to subscribe. Check out this video next, thank you for your support, and I'll see you next time.